It was a quiet afternoon in the city. The sun was shining, and people were walking with shopping bags in their hands. Inside a luxury clothing store, the lights were bright, the floors were clean, and the smell of expensive perfume filled the air. The store manager, Mr. Steve, stood behind the counter. He was in his early 40s, wearing a sharp suit and a serious face. He always believed in keeping the store clean and professional, but his idea of that was twisted. Then the door opened. The black woman walked in, dressed in a simple but elegant black coat. Her name was Naomi. She looked calm, confident, and graceful. She smiled as she entered, quietly greeting the young woman at the front desk. But Mr. Steve's eyes narrowed. He leaned toward one of the staff and whispered, "Keep an eye on her. She doesn't look like she belongs here." The staff looked surprised but nodded, too scared to speak up. Naomi walked slowly around the store, looking at the clothes, touching the fabrics, admiring the colors. Her face was peaceful, but her eyes were sharp, like she understood everything happening around her. As she moved to the handbag section, Mr. Steve stepped forward. His shoes clicked loudly on the floor. He crossed his arms and stood in front of her. "Can I help you with something?" he asked, not in a kind way, but like he didn't want her there. Naomi looked at him calmly. "Just looking," she replied with a small smile. Mr. Steve didn't smile back. "This store is quite expensive. Maybe you're in the wrong place." Naomi blinked. She wasn't surprised, but it still hurt. "I know where I am," she said gently, "and I know what I'm looking for." He stepped closer. "Ma'am, if you're not buying anything, I'll have to ask you to leave." A few other customers started watching. A couple nearby whispered to each other. The young staff girl at the desk looked nervous. She had served Naomi water earlier and had felt her kindness. But now, she was afraid to speak up. Naomi looked around the store. "I didn't know there was a time limit to look at clothes." "There isn't," Mr. Steve replied coldly. "For our regular customers. But we've had problems before. I can't take risks." Naomi raised an eyebrow. "What kind of problems?" Steve didn't answer. He was firm. "Please, don't make this hard. I need you to leave." Naomi stayed calm, but her voice became stronger. "Are you asking me to leave because of my skin color?" Steve froze for a moment but quickly covered it. "I'm asking you to leave because this isn't the place for you." Naomi gave a small laugh, not out of humor, but disbelief. "I see," she said softly. She took out her phone and dialed a number. Mr. Steve's eyes widened. "Who are you calling?" Naomi didn't answer him. Into the phone, she said, "Hi, this is Naomi Carter. Can you please connect me to the regional director?" Now the staff and the customers were really paying attention. Steve laughed nervously. "You're calling the regional director? Why? You think you can scare me?" Naomi put the phone down for a second and looked him in the eye. "I don't need to scare you," she said. "The truth is enough." Her voice was calm, but there was power in it, a power that came from experience and from knowing who she was. Steve folded his arms again. "You can call whoever you want, but I've been managing this place for 5 years. I know who belongs here and who doesn't." Naomi just smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the kind of smile that said, "You have no idea who you're talking to." Just then, the young staff member who had been silent walked closer. "Sir," she whispered, I think she's someone important." Steve turned to her angrily. "Don't be silly. She's just pretending." But Naomi was already back on the phone. "Yes," she said. "I'm at the downtown branch. Yes, your manager just asked me to leave." There was a pause. Then she spoke the words that would change everything. "Thank you. I'll wait here." She ended the call and looked around the store again. Everything was quiet. The customers were still. The staff didn't know what to say. Steve looked uncomfortable now, but he still didn't understand. Naomi walked over to a chair and sat down with perfect grace. She crossed her legs, looked at Steve, and said in a calm voice, "I think we'll wait together. The truth is coming." The store was quiet now. Naomi sat calmly in the chair. Her hands rested on her lap, and her phone was still in her hand. She had just spoken to someone powerful, but she didn't raise her voice. She didn't threaten anyone. She didn't need to. Mr. Steve stood near the counter, pacing back and forth. He looked at her like she was a problem that refused to go away. He turned to her sharply. "Ma'am, I don't think you understand how serious this is. You can't just walk in here and pretend to be someone important." Naomi looked up at him. "I didn't pretend anything." "Sure you didn't," he said sarcastically. "You think you can just make a call and scare me." A few customers were still watching. One woman whispered to her friend, "Why is he talking to her like that?" The young staff member, Mia, stood near the desk, biting her lip. She looked at Naomi, then at her boss. She wanted to say something, but fear kept her quiet. Naomi stood up now. Slowly, gracefully, she looked around the store. Her voice was calm, but full of meaning. "Is this how you treat all your customers?" she asked. Loud voice, angry face, asking them to leave for no reason. Steve didn't answer. He felt the pressure now, but his pride wouldn't let him back down. He stepped closer. "You're turning this into something it's not." Naomi held his eyes. "No," she said softly. "You already turned it into something ugly." That made him angry. His face turned red. "You know what? Fine. I'll call security. You can explain your little game to them." Naomi raised an eyebrow. "Go ahead." Steve picked up the store phone and dialed a number. As he waited, he kept glancing at Naomi like she was a threat to his entire world. But Naomi wasn't scared. She took out a small black notebook from her purse and started writing something in it. "What are you writing?" Steve snapped. Naomi didn't look up. "Details. What you said. What I saw. Names." Steve scoffed. "You're wasting your time." At that moment, the front door opened again. A tall man in a black suit walked in, followed by a woman in a business dress. They both looked serious. The man had a badge on his shirt that said Regional Director, Marcus Lane. Steve's face dropped. The man scanned the room, saw Naomi, and walked quickly to her. "Miss Carter," he said, with respect in his voice, "I came as fast as I could." Naomi smiled softly and shook his hand. Steve's mouth opened slightly. He looked from Naomi to the director, confused. "Wait, what did you call her?" The woman beside Marcus stepped forward. "Ms. Naomi Carter, the founder of this company." Silence filled the store. Mia, the young staff member, gasped. Naomi didn't say anything. She didn't have to. Steve blinked. "No, that's not possible. The founder is she's a businesswoman. I've seen her photo somewhere." Marcus turned toward Steve slowly. His voice was low and serious. "You saw her photo," he said, "but today you saw her in person and treated her like trash." Steve took a step back. "I didn't know. I didn't recognize her." She didn't say anything. Naomi finally spoke again. Her voice was soft, but firm. "I didn't have to. You showed me exactly who you are before I said a word." Customers were staring now. Some took out their phones. Others shook their heads. Marcus looked at Steve, his face hard. "You embarrassed our brand. You insulted our founder. You treated a valued customer like a criminal, all based on your personal judgment." Steve stammered. I was just doing my job. I was trying to protect the store." "From what?" Naomi asked quietly. "A black woman in a coat." Steve had no answer. Mia finally stepped forward. Her voice was shaking. She was polite. She didn't do anything wrong. He was the one who raised his voice. He told us to follow her. Marcus nodded. "Thank you for telling the truth." Steve looked at the floor. Marcus sighed. "I think we need to step into the back office now. There will be consequences." Steve tried to speak. "Please, I didn't mean to." Naomi interrupted gently. "You meant every word. You just didn't expect me to be someone who mattered." There was silence again. Marcus turned to Naomi. "We are deeply sorry, ma'am. I promise you, we will handle this." Naomi gave a soft smile. "I'm not here for revenge. I'm here for change." She looked around the store, at the staff, the customers, even the silent clothes on the racks. "Because this story isn't just mine," she said. "It belongs to every person who's ever been judged without being known." And with that, she sat back down, waiting for what came next. As Naomi sat calmly in the luxury store, people were still whispering, still staring. The truth had just begun to unfold, but it wasn't the full story. Not even close. Because Naomi Carter didn't just own a few shares in the company. She built it. And to understand her silence, her strength, and the calm power in her eyes, you have to go back. Flashback. The beginning. Years ago, Naomi stood outside a small shop in a poor neighborhood. The sign above the door was crooked. The walls were cracked. But inside, she had hope. A big one. That shop was her dream. She had no big investors, no famous last name. Just her savings, a few clothes she stitched by hand, and a heart full of determination. People laughed at her. "You'll never make it," they said. "Nobody wants to buy from a black woman with no name." Some even refused to walk into her store. But Naomi worked every day, sun up to sundown. She cleaned the floors herself. She folded every shirt, every scarf, with care. And every customer, rich or poor, she welcomed with the same smile. Slowly, people noticed. Not because of her face, but because of the feeling inside her store. Warmth, respect, beauty. Flashback. Growth and struggle. She didn't have money for ads, so she told stories instead. Every product came with a story, of struggle, of hope, of kindness. People listened. They shared those stories. And soon, her little shop became 2. Then 5. But it wasn't easy. Naomi faced racism, rejection, and closed doors. Some malls wouldn't rent her space. Some investors walked out when they saw her. One even told her, "We don't think your look fits our brand." Naomi didn't argue. She smiled, walked out, and built her own brand instead. Flashback. Founding the company. After 5 years of endless work, Naomi launched her fashion company, NC Grace. She named it after her mother, Grace, who worked as a cleaner her whole life, but never stopped believing in her daughter. Naomi was proud, but quiet. She didn't put her face everywhere. She didn't need to. She let her work speak. She trained every store manager to treat people with kindness, to judge no one, to respect every soul that walked in the door. She built a company on values, not just clothes. And it worked. Today, NC Grace had over 60 stores, hundreds of staff, and thousands of loyal customers. But many of them didn't know her face. Because she stayed behind the scenes, back to present, inside the store. Now, in that very store, one of her own, Naomi was treated like a stranger, like a threat. The same woman who trained others to treat people fairly had just been told to leave for no reason at all. Mr. Steve, the manager, stood in the back office, pacing like a man who knew he was about to lose everything. The regional director, Marcus, sat quietly across from him, reviewing the report. Steve spoke fast. "She didn't say she was the founder. How was I supposed to know?" Marcus looked up. "So, you treat people based on who you think they are?" Steve hesitated. "No, I thought she didn't belong here." "And why did you think that?" Silence. Outside the office, Naomi looked around the store that she once dreamed of as a young woman. She saw the faces of staff, some afraid, some ashamed. Mia, the youngest worker, came up to her. "I'm so sorry, Mom," she whispered. "I didn't know who you were, but I knew you were kind." Naomi smiled gently. "That's all that matters." Voiceover for audience. They saw her coat, not her courage. They saw her skin, not her story. But Naomi Carter wasn't just a customer. She was the root, the foundation, the fire behind the brand. Naomi's phone buzzed. Another message of support. More apologies. People were watching now. Online, in offices, in other stores. Her story was spreading. But Naomi didn't want revenge. She wanted a lesson to be learned. Outside the store, the world was moving fast. But inside, time felt like it had slowed down. Naomi Carter had just exposed the truth, not with anger, not with shouting, but with grace and quiet strength. Her words still echoed in the minds of everyone who had heard them. But that moment wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. The video that changed everything. One of the customers, a teenager, had recorded the whole encounter. From the moment Naomi was told to leave, to the moment she revealed her identity. She uploaded it with the caption, "This black woman was thrown out of a luxury store, then revealed she owns the brand." Within hours, it spread like wildfire. Thousands, then millions watched. People were shocked, angry, inspired. Voiceover style narration, internal thought. They judged her before they knew her. They pushed her before they saw her. But truth doesn't stay quiet forever. It speaks, and the world listens. Back in the store, reactions begin. Mia, the young staff girl, scrolled on her phone. Her eyes widened. "It's everywhere," she whispered. She turned to Naomi. "They're calling you a hero." Naomi gave a soft smile. "I'm not a hero. I'm just tired of pretending everything is okay when it's not." Mr. Steve was still in the office, but now he looked like a broken man. His phone kept buzzing. Calls from the company's HR, emails from higher management, even messages from friends. He had no answers. The store was no longer just a place to shop. It had become a symbol. Flashback. Naomi's old memories. Naomi sat quietly in a corner chair. Her eyes were open, but her mind drifted back. She remembered being 19 years old, walking into a store just like this one. She had saved for weeks just to buy a dress. But the staff had followed her around, whispering behind her back. And in the end, they told her the same thing Steve had said today. "You don't belong here." She never forgot that moment. That's why she built NC Grace, not just to sell fashion, but to build spaces of dignity and kindness. Seen. Social media explodes. On Instagram, people shared the video with captions like, "This is why representation matters." Naomi Carter, the silent powerhouse we didn't know we needed. Imagine kicking out the founder of your own store. News channels picked it up. Talk shows invited Naomi to speak. Fashion blogs posted her old designs. Her quiet brand became a loud voice for justice. But Naomi didn't jump at fame. She stayed calm. She stayed grounded. Meanwhile, Steve's world falls apart. Steve sat with his head in his hands. He remembered all the times he judged someone by their clothes, their accent, their skin. He had been warned before. A few staff had filed small complaints, but they were ignored. He always thought he was doing the right thing. But now, that lie was falling apart. For the first time, Steve felt something new. Shame. He wasn't afraid of losing his job. He was afraid of facing who he had become. Back in the store, a new energy. By the next day, the store had a different feeling. Customers walked in and whispered, "Is this where it happened?" A woman hugged Mia and said, "Thank you for standing by her." Mia smiled shyly. "I just followed my heart." And then, just before closing time, Naomi returned, wearing the same coat, walking the same way. But this time, everyone stood up straighter. They weren't afraid. They were proud. Naomi speaks to the staff. Naomi gathered all the staff for a quiet meeting in the lounge. She looked around the room. Her voice was gentle. "You all saw what happened, and you all felt what it meant. This isn't just about one person. It's about what we allow and what we stop. She paused. There will be changes, real ones. We will train, we will listen, and we will rise higher, together. Mia raised her hand. Ma'am, will you be coming to more stores? Naomi smiled. Yes, I won't stay in the background anymore. Days passed since the truth about Naomi Carter had shaken the luxury store and the entire brand. But this story wasn't just about one mistake. It was about what would happen after the truth came out. Because real change doesn't start with a scandal. It starts with a decision. And Naomi was ready to make one. Scene: corporate headquarters. Naomi sat at the head of a long glass table. It was the first time in 5 years she had called a full leadership meeting. Around her were store directors, marketing heads, HR leaders, and board members. Some looked nervous, others curious. Naomi placed a small notebook on the table, the same one she had used to write down what happened in the store. She looked at them quietly. Then she spoke. I didn't call this meeting to talk about me. I called it to talk about us. The wake-up call. She stood up and walked slowly to a whiteboard behind her. We sell beauty. We talk about elegance. But what kind of beauty lets disrespect walk freely in its halls? No one answered. Naomi continued. I built this company for everyone. For people who've been ignored, pushed aside, told they don't belong. But last week, I saw that even inside our walls, some of those old lies are still alive. She looked around the room. Her voice didn't rise, but it carried weight. I will not let that happen again. New rules, new culture. That day, Naomi introduced something powerful. Mandatory anti-bias training for all staff. Secret shopper visits, not to catch mistakes, but to observe culture. Listening sessions, where employees could safely share their stories. And most importantly, a new mission. Kindness is luxury. Some board members shifted in their seats. Will this hurt the brand? One asked. Naomi smiled. No, this is the brand now. Scene: Steve's final meeting. In a quiet room, Steve sat with HR and Naomi. His hands were shaking. I don't have an excuse, he said softly, but I do have regret. Naomi looked at him, not with hate, but with something deeper. You failed, yes, she said, but this isn't just about you. It's about what we allowed. Steve nodded slowly. I never thought about how I made people feel. Not really. Naomi paused. You're not the only one who needs to grow, she said, but you can't lead while you learn. You need to step down. Tears formed in Steve's eyes. He didn't argue. He simply said, thank you for not destroying me. And I'm sorry. The media storm. News outlets called Naomi's leadership graceful, bold, and long overdue. Some people said she should have fired everyone involved. But others saw the deeper truth. She didn't just expose a moment. She exposed a mindset and offered a better way. Naomi was invited to speak on national TV. On the show, the host asked, how did it feel being judged like that? Naomi replied, it felt like being invisible, but I didn't come to fight. I came to be seen and to make sure no one else feels invisible in my stores ever again. The people respond. Online, people shared their own stories. A man who was followed in a store for wearing baggy clothes. A woman who was asked if she could afford it before she even spoke. A teenager who was laughed at for her accent. Naomi read each story, and she replied to many. You matter. Your story matters. You belong. Scene: training day at the store. Back in the same store where it all began, a group of employees gathered in the back room. Mia, the young staff member, sat in the front row. A trainer handed out small cards. On each one was written, you are the face of this company. Treat every person like they are the founder. Because one day, they just might be. Mia held the card tight. She looked at Naomi, who had come to watch. Ma'am, she said softly. You changed everything. Naomi smiled gently. No, Mia. We did. Naomi thought the storm had passed, but she was wrong. What happened in that small store had created a ripple, a wave that was now reaching far beyond her company. Because when one woman stood up, others found the courage to stand too. Seen. Other stores respond. At NC Grace stores across the country, staff were talking. Managers were rethinking. Customers were watching. In one store, a young Muslim woman wearing a hijab shared with her manager that a colleague once called her too traditional to work in fashion. In another, a staff member with a thick accent finally reported the jokes people made behind her back. And in both stores, for the first time, they were heard. All because one woman had refused to stay silent. Naomi's quiet visits. Naomi didn't tell the press, but she began quietly visiting different locations, unannounced, not to test them, to feel them. She walked in as a customer, just like before. Sometimes she was recognized, sometimes she wasn't, and what she saw gave her hope. At one store, a cashier stopped her own manager from making fun of a customer's outfit. At another, a team had written their own pledge and hung it behind the register. Kindness is fashion. Respect is always in style. Naomi smiled. The message was growing. Seen. Letters from strangers. Every day, Naomi's office received hundreds of letters and emails. Not just from customers, but from students, workers, and even business owners. One letter stood out. It came from a small town and was written by hand. Dear Miss Naomi, I work at a store where I don't feel safe being myself. I saw your story. It made me cry. Now I want to build a company like yours one day. One where everyone can belong. Thank you for showing us it's possible. Naomi held the letter close. She had always believed her job was to design clothing. But now she knew. She was also designing change. Seen. A school visit. A teacher invited Naomi to speak at a school where many students came from poor or immigrant families. Naomi hesitated. She had never seen herself as a speaker. But she said yes. When she walked into the classroom, the students gasped. One girl whispered, "She looks like me." Naomi began to speak. I was told I wasn't good enough, that I didn't belong in business, that my skin, my voice, my dreams were too different. But I didn't stop, and neither should you. Tears rolled down the teacher's face. This wasn't just a talk. It was a seed, planted deep inside hearts that had never dared to dream big before. Seen. Internal growth. Inside the company, real changes had begun. Every new employee had to go through bias training. A new diversity council was formed. Staff from different races, religions, body types, and backgrounds. The hiring process was changed to include people from underrepresented communities. And for the first time ever, store uniforms included optional cultural expressions, scarves, pins, jewelry that reflected personal identity with pride. This wasn't about political correctness. It was about belonging. Seen. Naomi's personal growth. At home, Naomi sat with her sister, Lana, who watched the video again. You were so calm, Lana said. I don't know how you did it. Naomi looked out the window. Because I've been through worse, and because I wanted to be heard, not feared. Lana nodded. You've changed everything, you know. Naomi shook her head gently. No, I just gave people permission to be real. Voiceover/narration style. It started with a mistake. A cruel word. A quiet push. But it became a lesson. A mirror. A movement. And sometimes, all it takes is one voice to remind the world of its heart. Seen. A special email. One evening, Naomi received an email that surprised her. It was from the CEO of another luxury brand, a competitor. He wrote, Dear Naomi, what you did shook our industry, and it should have. We'd like to invite you to speak to our executive board, not for publicity, but because we want to learn. Naomi stared at the screen. This was more than growth. This was influence. And she was ready. Closing scene of Part 6. The story that began in silence had now reached thousands of voices. A woman once pushed out of a store was now being invited into boardrooms, schools, and hearts. She didn't ask for power. She earned it with grace, truth, and courage. And as she walked through another store one evening, a staff member came up and whispered, "You made this feel like home again." Naomi smiled and replied, "That was always the plan." Fade out. Weeks had passed since Naomi Carter was nearly thrown out of her own store. Since then, everything had changed. The company had transformed. The people had grown. The world had listened. But for Naomi, one thing remained unfinished. She had one last place to visit. One last chapter to close. Scene: the old dress shop. Early one morning, Naomi got into her car and drove across the city, far from her tall offices and bright stores. She returned to the place where her journey began, a small dress shop from her teenage years. The same shop where, years ago, a store clerk had looked at her brown skin, her simple shoes, and said, "People like you can't afford things here." That day had broken something inside her, but it had also lit a fire. Now she was back, not as a teenager, but as a CEO, a leader, a founder. She opened the door. The bell above rang softly. Inside the shop, it was still the same. Same narrow aisles, same mirrors, same cold feeling. But Naomi wasn't afraid anymore. A young girl at the counter looked up and smiled. "Good morning, ma'am. Can I help you?" Naomi smiled back. "No, thank you. I just wanted to see this place again." The girl tilted her head. "Have you been here before?" Naomi looked around and said softly, "Yes, a long time ago. But I was invisible back then." Flashback narration. "That day, I left feeling small. I promised myself, no one else should ever feel like that. I didn't build my brand for profit. I built it for dignity, for belonging, for every young girl who's ever been told she's not enough." Scene: the final interview. A journalist sat with Naomi in her office. She asked, "After everything that's happened, what's the biggest lesson you've learned?" Naomi thought for a moment. Then she answered, "Power doesn't come from being the loudest. It comes from standing up when it's hardest. Real strength isn't in titles or money. It's in kindness, in listening, in making people feel seen." The journalist asked, "What's next for you?" Naomi smiled. "I'm not done yet. This isn't just a fashion brand anymore. It's a movement." Scene: a company reborn. NC Grace launched a new campaign. Billboards showed real people, not models. Different ages, sizes, races, styles. The new slogan: "You belong here." The campaign went viral. But it wasn't just about clothing anymore. It was about a message the world needed to hear. Scene: Steve's return. One day, Naomi received a letter. It was from Steve, the manager who had told her to leave. It said, "I've been volunteering at a youth center. I tell young people my story, not as a hero, but as a warning. Thank you for not destroying me. You changed my life." Naomi folded the letter and smiled. Redemption wasn't easy, but it was possible. Voiceover, emotional climax. She entered the store as a stranger. She left as the owner. But her real victory was reminding the world that everyone matters, that every story counts, that love, quiet, steady, unshakable, always wins. Scene: Naomi with the next generation. At a small event, Naomi stood on stage with young girls and boys. One child raised their hand and asked, "Can someone like me become a founder too?" Naomi knelt down, looked into their eyes, and said, "You already are. You just haven't built it yet." The crowd clapped. Tears filled many eyes. And Naomi knew. Her story was no longer just hers. It belonged to everyone. Final scene. Full circle. Late at night, Naomi walked past one of her stores. The same location from part 1. Inside, a new manager was helping a young black girl pick a dress. They were laughing, smiling. No judgment, only joy. Naomi didn't go in. She just stood outside and watched. Then she whispered, This is what I dreamed of." She turned and walked into the night. Peaceful, proud, and finally, free.